Hey, warmer from the Elo! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Hoops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family podcast. We've got an excellent podcast for you as we're going to be joined in segment number 2 by one of our good friends, Nate Hornung. He does great work as being better known as Shaggy Bets over there at Your Betting News. We're going to be chatting with him about all the recent coaching changes that we've seen. Obviously, the St. Joe's situation with them losing Billy Lang, and they're going to be turning to Steve Donahue this season, Wofford, and what is all happening with that ordeal, with us perhaps not knowing whether or not Wofford is going to be having a season in general, and what we just saw today with Bruce Pearl deciding to step down over at Auburn, and we are certainly going to be diving into the Auburn situation here in segment number 1. Very, very big news there, so we're going to be chatting about that and so much more. If you ever do have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you have one of two ways we'll fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larry CM, they mean does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline, and the other way is via an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. While we did not get in any Twitter/X questions today, everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever with EdgeBoost. 100% of gambling transactions do get approved, and when you go to EdgeBoost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That's going to get you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25, and we do have to, here in segment number 1, just air out what happened with Auburn on Monday with the fact that Bruce Pearl, he decides with about 42, 43 days before the start of the college basketball season that he is going to be stepping down as Auburn's head coach. And Steve Pearl, who's been with the program really over the last few seasons, he's been with Bruce Pearl, I believe, since 2014 when he took over Auburn. He is going to be the interim coach here. We'll see if he's going to be able to get more than just this 1 year, but for Steve Pearl, he's going to have a very interesting task on hand, and we will see if anyone transfers from Auburn, because whenever you have a coaching change like we saw with Auburn, these guys have 30 days to be able to transfer out. I would have to think that there was probably a little bit of chatter behind the scenes with this, but we're not quite sure, because we have seen a lot of rumors with it being perhaps that Bruce Pearl might be running for Senate or something like that. As of right now, that has not quite been confirmed. Now, that could be different when this podcast comes out. I'm not saying that that is indeed the case, that it's not completely confirmed, but as of right now, it looks like it's only just a little bit of a rumor. I know that a lot of people were talking about he was very much affected by the Charlie Kirk situation and everything like that, so we are going to know more about that situation within the next few days, and that is a situation of to each their own, in my opinion, because when it comes to the basketball and the basketball side of things only, now we need to take a look at this Auburn team with Steve Pearl taking over as the new interim coach for this team, and it should be a rock-solid team. They were able to retain Todd Pettiford, which I didn't see if he really got disciplined at all for the DUI that we saw in the offseason, so we're going to see if there's going to be a little bit of disciplinary action before the start of the season there. That is obviously something to be taking a look at, but Auburn had a relatively solid transfer portal haul, in my opinion. It's a very much new-look team, with not having Janai Broome and guys like that from a season ago. That hurts this team, but you bring in a guy like a Keshawn Murphy, who has been around the block, rock-solid big man that was over at Mississippi State last few seasons, so he's all too familiar with the SEC. Keshawn Hall, he was very good over at Central Florida last season, a guy that's able to pop it from 3 at 6'7", he's able to give you some good rebounding, he's able to defend relatively well, and they have a little bit of a mix and match roster, and they do bring in quite a few transfers. Abdul Bashir, he's going to be a big cog for this team. His brother was actually a 20-point per game scorer over at Monmouth last season. Bashir was one of the top junior college players in all of college basketball last season. They bring in Kevin Overton, guys like this, and we're going to see if Steve Pearl is going to maintain the same sort of style that Auburn has had the last few seasons, as Auburn has always been a pretty tough, tenacious defensive team, but at the same time, they play fast, but not like breakneck pace fast or anything like that. So this is going to be a very, very interesting, shall we say, time span for Auburn, and I've talked about this on the podcast over the last few days, and I'll mention it once again. Just because you see a coaching change with regards to some of these teams here just before the run-up of the season doesn't mean that it's necessarily doomsday for that team. We've seen plenty of teams be able to excel. Now, the Virginia situation, that was just absolutely awful last season, and this does read a little bit more like the Virginia situation, though, for Bruce Pearl. Obviously, it's not because of like NIL concerns or anything like that. Maybe he just wanted a break from coaching. Maybe he's going to be running for Senate. We shall see on that within the next few weeks. But for Steve Pearl, he has been with the program for quite a while. When Ron Sanchez took over at Virginia, he was coaching for Charlotte for the longest of time. So it's not like he had been with the program for quite as long. And I do think that with it being a balance of power and a transfer of power to the son, keeping it within the family, that might be able to go a little bit better for Auburn as well. But certainly very interesting times. We're going to know more about this in the coming days and coming weeks, but certainly something to monitor and something that was just massive news in college basketball on Tuesday. We're going to talk a little bit more about that with our good friend Shaggy Betts, aka Nate Hornung. On top of that, we're going to be talking about what we've seen with the Wofford ordeal, and we're going to try to see if we can get a few teams that he's feeling bullish/bearish on coming into the upcoming season as well. That's up next, right here on Coast to Coast with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast. And we're back in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always good to be joined by this man, as we've got Nate Hornung aboard. He does such a great job over at Your Betting News. He does a lot of great written work for them. He does a lot of great work with their shows like Upper Your Units, and he's a little bit all over the place when it comes to Your Betting News. Does a great job on so many things like football, college basketball, and so much more. And you might be wondering who Nate Hornung is. Well, you might know him a little bit better by his Twitter/X handle at Shaggy_Bets. And Nate, it's always great to get you aboard. Thank you.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here, Greg. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Nate. And how about if first things first, we talk about the big news that we saw on Monday. The fact that Auburn, they lose their coach in Bruce Pearl. He decides to step away. There are some reports that he might be running for Senate. There have been some people that have been saying that that is not the case. I do not know, but that said, what we do know is that he is no longer the coach, and his son, Stephen Pearl, is now going to be taking over the program. Just how do you take a look at an Auburn team that is just a few months removed from being in the Final Four? Obviously, his son has been with the program for quite some time, but very earth-shattering news about a month and a half away from the start of the season.
Yeah, absolutely surprising news. I did not expect the college basketball world to have this kind of news today, but yeah, Bruce Pearl no longer at Auburn. You know, it brings me back to when we saw Tony Bennett leave the Virginia program, you know, right before the season. Obviously, this is a little bit further from the start of the season, whereas Tony Bennett was just a couple weeks before things got going. But, you know, I don't really know what to think of this Auburn team anymore. They've got to replace plenty of personnel already. And now you've got to turn over a head coach, too, right before the season starts. First official day of practices, actually. So very surprising news. I will just see how it plays out, because it is a stacked SEC that the Auburn Tigers are going to have to battle in.
Yep, and I do think that there's a lot of people that assume when you do have a coaching change this late that it means doomsday, and you brought up the Virginia situation, and in that case it was doomsday, but how do you take a look at it? Because, I mean, we've had a lot of them. With Wofford, we don't even know if they're going to be fielding a team at this point, so, well, you can't fade a team if they don't have a team, but that said, they're interesting. Obviously, St. Joe's is as well, but we've seen examples like with Wichita State and that Greg Marshall situation where it didn't mean doom and gloom for them, and I think that it's just so interesting taking a look at these situations, because sometimes it leads to just an exodus and it just leads to a horrible season, but sometimes these seasons actually turn out quite well.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And, you know, Auburn is still, you know, a team to be reckoned with in the SEC. They've still got plenty of good guys, a bunch of transfers they brought in. Keyshawn Hall mainly, I think he's going to be a stud for this Auburn Tigers team. Abdul Bashir, coming from the junior college level, I think will make an immediate impact as well. But you've got to think of how this impacts the locker room. A lot of guys were going there to play for Bruce Pearl, play for his style of basketball. And, you know, now you've got his son stepping up, and it'll probably be a little bit similar, but it's got to just shake locker room morale, you know, a couple of months before the season. So we'll see how it goes. I'm a little weary of this Auburn basketball team coming into the season with this coaching change.
Yep, I am as well, and I wasn't necessarily feeling the world's greatest about this Auburn team even beforehand as well, because I've not seen if Todd Pettiford is going to be suspended at the beginning of the season, what have you, for that DUI situation, but I take a look at all that they lost from the previous year. Obviously, Janai Broom had been such a constant for that team. They're trying to replace him with Keyshawn Hall and guys like that, and to begin with, I thought that Auburn wasn't going to be like missing the NCAA tournament or anything like that, but I certainly thought that they were going to be on the outside looking in terms of like your top 3, top 4 teams in the SEC, and this does cause me to just be reaffirmed of that a little bit more.
Yeah, no doubt about it. Again, they brought in plenty of personnel, but it's the nature of college basketball now is how quickly can you turn over these guys? How quickly can you get them bought into a program? And without the head coach that they were expecting, it makes it that much harder.
Yep, no question about it. As we do have Nate Hornung, he's better known as Shaggy Betts. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And as of right now, because we're talking a lot about coaching changes, we don't even know if Wofford's going to have a team right now because they fired their coach in Dwight Perry. It feels like everyone is upset, and people thought that he was getting fired because of the off-campus meal plan use that they had because it made a lot of guys ineligible. Well, those guys are reinstated. The coaches are not. They still have not announced who their coach is going to be moving forward. Just how do you look at the Wofford ordeal? Because I do think that there's a world where they just need to bring Perry back, but even if they do bring Perry back, they've already lost out on critical days and weeks of preparation trying to get set for the upcoming season, and you do have to feel like this is just a hamper to them in general.
Oh, yeah, no doubt about it. And I mean, we are a few weeks away from college basketball starting. So trying to get the guys rallied around and bought into a program when you don't even have a head coach, it's nearly impossible, So I'm seeing reports of maybe hiring, former alumnus Kevin Giltner of Virginia Tech. He's been an assistant there. I don't really know what to think of this Terriers team, but I'm glad those players got reinstated. It was clearly no fault of their own. They're just some college kids trying to get a meal. So I'm glad the NCAA reinstated them. As far as the coaches go, it might be a character building season for this Wofford team who's kind of been in the NCAA tournament, several of the past few years, usually one of those mid-majors that kind of makes some runs. So this might not be the case for them this year.
Yeah, and I did my conference preview a few weeks before this all came out, and I actually had Wofford number 2, my projector finish. I feel like Furman is hands down clearly the number 1 team coming into the season, but how do you take a look at the landscape of the SoCon? A SoCon that might actually be down a team this year if the players actually carry out the boycott, because if they don't have their guys decide that they're wanting to play for this team, there's no way they could go in the transfer portal in late September and be able to pluck out a bunch of guys. They would have to just pretty much not field a team this year. But I mean, assuming that we do have what we have, how do you take a look at this landscape? Because I thought that Wofford had the chance to be that number 2 team. Now it feels like it's a hodgepodge with teams like East Tennessee State and Chattanooga being able to vie as perhaps a top competitor to Furman.
Yeah, no doubt about it. I think you're dead on Furman is kind of head and shoulders the best team in the conference, especially with the Wofford situation. But I wouldn't sleep on the Chattanooga Mocs. I think they've got some great personnel there. They've got players that have been here before, ready to kind of play that mid-major spoiler when it comes down to crunch time in the Southern Conference. And, I've actually got a soft spot for the Catamounts of Western Carolina. Been a couple of, character-building seasons for them, but I think they might be able to turn it around. And again, SoCon Conference is really wide open with this Wofford news.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that as well, because I'm bullish on Western Carolina as well. I don't think that they're going to be finishing like top 3 in the conference or anything like that, but I think that this could be a highly profitable team because I think you'd agree with me on this. We've seen a lot of turnover in the SoCon, and having a Western Carolina team that, well, it wasn't so great for them last year, but they have so many returning guys where other teams, like even Chattanooga, who we both like, they've got a lot of guys to replace, including that entire backcourt from a season ago. I think that that's something that makes me feel very bullish about Western Carolina and makes me look at them as a team that I think could be very profitable this season.
I definitely totally agree with that. In the new nature of the NIL and the transfer portal, a lot of teams just turning over personnel, but I feel very strongly about the teams that have those guys that have been there before. And even with Western Carolina, they did not have a good season last year. It was a character building season. Rally around your guys, regroup, and get ready to change the landscape this season. Again, in a conference that doesn't really have a clear-cut winner besides Furman. So I like the Catamounts this year. I think they could be a little sneaky.
Yep, right there with you. I think that that's a team that I'm going to be penciling in as a team that when they're catching a few too many points in non-conference play, those are going to be some nice takes on the points. As Nate Hornung, you know him better as Shaggy Betts. He does amazing work over at Your Betting News. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops. And certainly we've got a lot of hoopla that's going on in college basketball. We just went through Auburn and Wofford, so we went down to the southern part of America. If you take a look at the northeast part as well, there's another coaching change that's happening as well. I can't remember last time we've seen 3 coaching changes in like mid-September, but here we are because with St. Joe's, they had their guy decide that he is going to be stepping down. It's now Steve Donahue that's going to be taking over for Billy Lang. And that out of the 3 situations that we've got right now, Wofford, Auburn, and St. Joe's, certainly I think that the one that I feel worse about is Wofford because they might not have a team this year. So absolutely. I think that they're the clear winner there, but St. Joe's actually might be the one that I feel best about because while it was a little bit of a difficult run of things for Steve Donahue last season, he's a guy that is from the Philadelphia Philadelphia area. He was coaching in Philadelphia last year. And I actually think, because we have not seen anyone transfer out of St. Joe's yet, in terms of X's and O's, with having Donahue at the helm, I think that actually might be a nice upgrade for them.
Yeah, no doubt about it. A lot of returning players on that St. Joe's roster. And with these coaches turnover, I know I sound like a broken record, but you got to get the guys to buy in. But with those guys returning, they might be ready to just step up for Donahue in that place. So I would agree. I think Wofford is kind of the bottom three out of those situations we mentioned. And yeah, St. Joe's might be the one I have the most positive feelings about.
Yep, and I think the biggest thing for St. Joe's is that middle of the conference in the Atlantic 10. I just take a look at it, and it once again feels like just a few bounces might be the difference between a team being in like the top 5 to the bottom 5, because once again, you've got a lot of rock-solid teams. There's a lot of teams where if you, like, pick names out of a hat for teams like 3 through 10, I'd probably be like, oh, that sounds relatively good. And I just feel like it's another one of those years for the Atlantic 10 where they're going to be sort of poaching each other. And I think that there's going to be a lot of attrition in the conference as well.
No doubt about it. We've had VCU obviously kind of runs the conference as much as they can, but they do beat up on each other. Like you said, very similar to my own home in the Big 12. Those teams just, they get after each other. They don't let anything easy happen within that conference. And just the whole landscape of the Atlantic 10 basketball, I really like it. It's really competitive. And again, these are mid-major teams that do surprise some people and maybe get overlooked in March when they get into the tournament. So I'll be keeping a special eye on the Atlantic 10 this season.
Absolutely. And I do want to ask you about this as well. Is there a team maybe out there in the Atlantic 10 that you're feeling a little bit bullish about? Because there are a lot of people that are sort of penciling in VCU as either being number 1 or number 2, even though they do have a little bit of a coaching change. Now, it helps when the coaching change in terms of them is Phil Martelli Jr. His father used to coach in the conference for a very, very long time, ironically enough, over at St. Joe's. But when you take a look at the Atlantic 10, is there a team that you think might be able to surprise a lot of people? Because I do think that when things are so tightly knit together, it comes down to chemistry. It comes down to a lot of guys are returning, and that leads me to thinking that George Washington might be able to have a massive year in this conference.
You know, I actually do not hate George Washington now that you bring that up. Another team that I kind of like just to be sneaky, and, you know, I'm not really sure how they're going to replace some of the pieces, but the Dayton Flyers, I think, are just a great basketball program kind of year in and year out, always competitive in that A10. And I know they have a couple of big losses they got to make up for. Malachi Smith no longer there. Enoch Cheeks no longer there. So personnel-wise, they're going to need to have some guys step up and score for them. But just the Dayton Flyers basketball, the culture there is phenomenal. It's been that way for several years now. So I'll be keeping an eye on the Flyers this season.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned them as well, because Dayton, in my opinion, was a little bit of a disappointing team last season. They brought in Zed Key, they brought in Pasha Alexander, guys that were starters at the power conference level, and they just never really materialized for the team. Do you think that might actually be a little bit of a better thing, that for Dayton, they bring in guys that maybe don't have as much firepower and as much, shall we say, name brand recognition as like a Pasha Alexander, but they bring in guys that I feel like just, in my opinion, fit the program a little bit better?
Absolutely. I love that description of, you know, fit the program, because the Flyers, they're not a national basketball brand like, you know, Duke and KU and Kentucky, but they're gritty. They're very gritty. They love defense. They're not afraid to win these low scoring games with you. So I think bringing in those guys that maybe have a chip on their shoulder, nothing to lose really, that's scary when you get a bunch of guys in a locker room bought in that really have nothing to lose. They're going to go and give their all every single night on the court. So I think that could turn into some success for Dayton this season.
Yep, I am right there with you. And we've talked a little bit about teams that we're feeling bullish on, and we just talked about it specifically with the Atlantic 10. And I do want to give you a little bit more of the open floor here, as we're now a little bit over a month away from the start of the college basketball season. As you've been doing your research, is there maybe a team or two that is a little bit off the beaten path, and maybe it's not getting talked about a ton, that you just feel bullish about coming into the upcoming season? Like, I know that you mentioned Western Carolina. I very much am glad that you mentioned them, because I think that they're going to be able to cover a lot of spreads this year. Is another team or two that's just coming to mind that you're feeling like they deserve a little bit more hype, and you feel like they might be profitable towards beginning part of the season?
Yeah, you know, a team that I really haven't heard a lot of people talk about this offseason is the Texas A&M Aggies. Buzz Williams brought in a pretty good transfer class in my eyes. We have Pop Isaacs coming from Creighton, obviously coming off the injury. We'll see how he kind of regroups, but I really think he fits the culture of the Texas A&M Aggies. I think he's going to be great leading that offense, taking over for Wade Taylor, and he's just a phenomenal on-ball defender, which Buzz Williams loves. You know, they also got Rylan Griffin coming over from from Kansas, who's a fantastic 3-and-D guy, assuming he can knock down those shots this year. And then you got a great rim protector in Fede Federico coming over from Texas Tech, staying in the state. Big 6'11" power forward that can also score as well. But, defense is the culture in Texas A&M run by Buzz Williams, and I think they got some guys to really revamp that program and kind of surprise some people. Again, in a very, very stacked SEC, it's going to be tough to do, but I think he's got the personnel to make some waves.
Buckyball coming to town. It's going to be a lot of fun out there at College Station, and it's always a lot of fun when you're aboard, Nate. I know that you're doing tremendous work over at Your Betting News, doing a little bit of everything, whether that be college basketball, whether that be football. You're a 5-2 player over there, so love to get people at home know it's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Absolutely, Greg. I like to describe myself as a jack of all trades and a master of none, man. Whatever you need me to talk about sports-wise, I can do it. But you can find me on all socials at Shaggy_bets, all of my written work at bettingnews.com. And like you mentioned, I'm on that podcast on Up Your Units on the Betting News Network with our good friend Colby Marcio, me and him yapping away about all things sports 3 days a week.
And I know that Kobe does absolutely tremendous work there. Nate, he is absolutely exceptional, and he does a nice job all year long taking a look at this wonderful game of college basketball. And every single time he joins me, lends such great insight. So big thanks to Nate for joining me on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts: Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, Larsium, naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. From there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I am with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season. Still coming at you guys with a bunch of conference preview podcasts as well. We've got 5 left to do, the Power 5. So we're into the big boys now. All the other mid-majors, we have done a conference preview for those as well. If you look wherever you're getting your podcasts at the just list of podcast dates that I have posted up, they're all there. So we've got you guys covered on that front. We pretty much went in alphabetical order with regards to those as well. So you're able to listen back to those, and I'll be back with you guys with a fresh podcast tomorrow. Thank you.